They handed out 5 designer gifts to every single child, except my 8-year-old daughter. She stood there, trembling, trying to smile while her cousins unwrapped tablets, drones, and pearls. And just when I thought I would have to carry her broken heart out of that room, my husband reached into his coat and changed everything with a single envelope. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, stay with me. Because this is how we took our power back, quietly and forever. Christmas tree speech balloon. Before we start, tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching from today? And if you believe love is louder than legacy, tap that like button and subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the day everything changed. My name is Kara, and at 34, you would think I'd be used to how the Winslows operate. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment my daughter's name was skipped, publicly, brutally, during the Christmas gift exchange. That morning, my 8-year-old daughter Sophie had been glowing. She was so proud, so excited to hand her grandparents a watercolor painting she had worked on for weeks. She had won a local art contest at school, beating kids 2 grades above her, and she believed that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. That this painting might finally get her a place on her grandmother's wall of perfect grandchildren. But I knew better. I had known better for 10 years. Ever since I married Michael Winslow, son of the impeccably proper, infuriatingly wealthy Richard and Vivian Winslow, I'd been reminded, both subtly and bluntly, that I did not belong. The Winslows were old money. Their family name adorned law firm buildings, endowments, and country club plaques. They wore crests on their luggage and passed down expectations along with trust funds. I was none of those things. I was a public school art teacher who paid her way through college waitressing and babysitting. I met Michael in university. He was the ambitious business student with the confident smile. I was the girl with a sketchbook always peeking out of her tote bag. We fell hard and fast, and he proposed after 2 years. His parents never approved, not even from the beginning. "She's very earnest," Vivian had told a friend during our first brunch together, not realizing I was still in earshot. We were married in a modest ceremony that Michael and I paid for ourselves. No catering hall chandeliers or string quartets, just laughter, real friends, and joy. Vivian's silence during the entire event was deafening. Richard only raised a toast when Michael prompted him. And for the next decade, nothing changed. No matter how kind I was, no matter how hard I tried, I remained the outsider who stole their golden boy. Then came Sophie. Born 2 years after our wedding, she inherited her father's soft brown eyes and my creative spark. She was thoughtful, quiet, whip-smart, and loved to draw more than anything. She could spend hours lost in her own imagination, creating stories and pictures of magical forests and space cities with crayons and watercolors. But to the Winslows, she was the quirky one, the spirited child, the one who didn't quite fit their mold of cello lessons and etiquette classes. Her cousin Emma, daughter of Michael's sister Charlotte, was the shining star, already a junior orchestra violinist and competitive skier at 8 years old. Charlotte married a U.S. senator's son, and Vivian had practically built a shrine to Emma with framed photos lining the halls and gold leaf scrapbooks detailing every recital and ribbon. Sophie had one photo, stuck in the guest room upstairs, behind a scented candle and a stack of coasters. Still, every year I hoped for something different. A nod of fairness. A sliver of inclusion. A simple thank you for showing up. But this year shattered any last illusions I had. Michael tried, bless him. He always did. He believed, perhaps out of habit, perhaps from love, that his family would eventually come around. "They're just reserved," he'd say. "Give them time. They're warming up." But after 10 years, it was clear they weren't warming up. They were actively drawing the lines, making sure Sophie and I stayed on the outside looking in. When we arrived at their estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, yes, the one with marble floors, 3 fireplaces, and an actual butler, Sophie was clutching her wrapped painting like it was a ticket into their world. She wore a slightly too small red velvet dress Vivian had mailed the year before. "Maybe she'll remember I wore it," she'd said hopefully that morning. Vivian greeted Michael with her usual theatrical enthusiasm, kissed both cheeks, complimented his haircut, and immediately pulled him into a conversation about real estate. When she turned to me, it was the same familiar, icy smile. "Kara," she said with a quick glance at my outfit, "that sweater is festive." Then came Sophie. "And you, my dear, are growing like a weed," she said. "Go on, the children are in the playroom." Emma's showing off her new riding ribbons. She did not ask Sophie what was in the gift she held. She did not ask what she'd been working on for 3 weeks with watercolors and hope. She barely made eye contact. Michael bent down to our daughter. "Go on, sweetheart. We'll be right here." And so, Sophie walked away, shoulders back, determination in her step. She still believed in magic. I did not. When Sophie walked toward the playroom, her little velvet dress swishing with every step, I wanted to stop her. I wanted to turn her around and drive back to our modest colonial home, where love actually lived. But I could not. Not yet. I needed to let her try. Because at 8 years old, she still had that resilient spark that made her believe in the goodness of people. Even people like the Winslows. I watched her disappear down the hall, gift in hand, then turned to face the perfectly decorated chaos around me. Christmas at the Winslows was like stepping into a glossy magazine ad, cream and gold everything, a 14-foot tree twinkling with imported antique ornaments, garlands wrapped with ribbon that looked too expensive to touch. It was beautiful, cold, sterile. Not a single mismatched ornament or handmade decoration in sight. Michael gave me a small smile, the kind that asked for patience. I gave him a smaller one back, the kind that said, "We've been here before." "Let's go say hi to the others," he said, offering me his arm like we were guests at a gala, not family at a Christmas celebration. The house was brimming with Winslows and their extended circles. His sister Charlotte was the first to make a beeline for Michael, talking a mile a minute about their recent Aspen trip and casually name-dropping luxury ski resorts. No mention of why we hadn't been invited. No acknowledgement of Sophie. "Kara, you look, well," Charlotte finally said, eyes skimming over my red sweater like it offended her fashion sensibilities. "New hair?" "Same as always," I replied with a tight smile, tucking a strand behind my ear. She said, pausing just long enough to let her judgment sink in. "Brave." I excused myself before I rolled my eyes so hard they stayed that way. Just as I reached for a glass of wine from the station bartender, yes, there was a bartender for this family event, I heard a familiar voice at my side. "Make it a double," said Brooke, Charlotte's sister-in-law by marriage and the only other person at these events who seemed to breathe oxygen instead of entitlement. "If I hear Vivian talk about her summer in Provence one more time, I'll drown myself in this wine," Brooke whispered conspiratorially. "You and me both," I muttered, clinking glasses with her. Brooke and I exchanged a few quick-witted jabs about the elite Winslow family nonsense before I spotted Sophie re-entering the room. Her face was pale, her smile faint. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed ever so slightly. I rushed to her side. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" She nodded too quickly. "Margot said my dress is last year's. And Emma said her mom said you can't afford the right schools for me." Her voice was small, like she was trying to protect me from the cruelty she had just endured. I bent down to her level, my heart cracking quietly. "Those weren't kind things to say. Where's your painting?" "I put it under the tree," she said softly. "Grandpa Richard told me to leave it with the other presents." I scanned the base of the enormous tree and spotted her carefully wrapped gift, brown craft paper with gold stars, a red ribbon tied in a wobbly bow, sitting awkwardly among the sea of professionally wrapped designer packages. It stuck out like a warm note in a cold room. Just then, Vivian appeared with a champagne flute in hand. "Sophie, darling, the other children are having dessert in the kitchen. Why don't you go join them?" Sophie looked at me uncertainly. I nodded, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. She slipped away, her little hands wringing each other nervously. Vivian turned to me with a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Kara, have you considered St. Margaret's for Sophie? All the grandchildren attend. Quite competitive, of course, but perhaps Michael could speak with someone on the admissions board." "Sophie loves her school," I said. "She's thriving there." Vivian sighed like I had just told her Sophie planned to join the circus. Well, I suppose public school is adequate, for now. She patted my arm in the same way someone might pat a wet dog that just tracked mud through a silk-carpeted foyer. Michael's father, Richard, summoned him to the study for what I could only imagine was a conversation about financial portfolios or company succession. I followed shortly after, curious. When I entered, the conversation halted mid-sentence. "Am I interrupting?" I asked lightly. "Not at all," Michael said quickly, though Richard's expression tightened like I had walked into a board meeting uninvited. "We were just discussing some family business," Richard said, nodding toward the mahogany bar cart as if I should know my place. Michael, ever the peacekeeper, tried to steer the conversation toward something warmer. "I was telling Dad about Sophie's art competition win." "Yes, very nice," Richard said blandly. "Although Emma just debuted with the Junior Symphony Orchestra. At 8. Remarkable, really." I swallowed my indignation. Sophie's painting won first place over students in 5th grade. One of the judges was from the Met. Richard gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. "How nice." He then pivoted, as if we had been discussing the weather, not our daughter's accomplishments. "Speaking of achievements, Jason, we've finalized Emma and Tyler's trust funds. Never too early to plan ahead." He said it casually, like he hadn't just drawn a thick red line between his grandchildren and ours. I glanced at Michael. He looked pained, but said nothing. A uniformed staff member appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Winslow, Mrs. Winslow has asked me to inform everyone dinner will be served in 5 minutes." "Of course," Richard replied, standing and effectively ending the conversation. As we made our way out, Michael gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I squeezed back, but my patience was waning. We had not even made it to the main meal, and already I could feel the fractures widening. Dinner was a production, a page out of Vogue Home if Vogue had a Christmas edition dedicated to making outsiders feel like furniture. The table was over 20 feet long, set with bone china, gilded cutlery, and a centerpiece of roses, greenery, and gold ornaments so tall I could barely see the person across from me. Of course, I was seated far from Michael. He was placed near Richard. I was stuck between a cousin's new fiancé and one of Richard's business partners who seemed delighted to learn I was just a teacher. "Art, you say?" My wife used to volunteer at a school. Found it quite rewarding, until she had real responsibilities. I smiled politely and took a larger sip of wine. At the kids' table in the adjacent breakfast nook, Sophie sat silently, her little fork resting untouched next to a barely eaten plate of vegetables. I watched her, willing her to feel loved through the distance between us. Vivian took center stage like a royal MC, guiding the conversation to focus only on acceptable topics: trips, private tutors, recent real estate acquisitions. "Charlotte, darling, tell us about Emma's performance at the symphony," she cooed. Charlotte obliged, beaming with pride. "Tyler won a regional swim competition," added Claudia, Michael's sister-in-law. "Andrew and I are considering buying in Tuscany," she added smoothly, as if planning international real estate deals was just part of making a weekly grocery list. And then, inevitably, came the jab. "Michael, you're still in your starter home, correct?" Michael replied diplomatically. "We love our neighborhood. Sophie's school is excellent, and Kara's commute is great." Vivian pursed her lips. "Well, when you're ready for something more suitable, you know your father, and I would be happy to assist." Assist. As if we were teetering on the edge of foreclosure instead of comfortably middle class. Richard cleared his throat and stood for the toast. "To family," he began. "To Grace and Philip, whose public service honors our name. To Andrew and Claudia, whose brilliance continues to grow our legacy." He listed everyone. Every child. Every spouse. Even a few distant relatives who only showed up for tax write-offs. He did not mention Michael. He did not mention Sophie. Or me. The glasses clinked, the toasts were made, and the evening marched forward like a gilded parade. Only Michael, Brooke, and I seemed to notice what had been left unsaid. After dessert, Vivian clapped her hands. "Shall we move to the living room for the gift exchange? Santa has been very generous this year." The children scrambled toward the tree like birds to breadcrumbs. Sophie stood last, watching, her little eyes glowing with expectation. Hope still clung to her like the glitter on her dress. My stomach twisted. I knew what was coming, but I still dared to hope. That was my mistake. The Winslow living room was transformed into what could only be described as a designer Christmas catalog come to life. The 14-foot tree sparkled in white and gold, positioned perfectly in front of massive bay windows framed with imported velvet drapes. Underneath it lay a sea of presents, gifts wrapped with flawless precision in glossy paper from high-end boutiques, each one topped with satin bows and scripted name tags. The whole scene was so excessively polished that it made the pile of gifts look less like a holiday tradition and more like a competitive display of wealth. And there, standing on the edge of it all, was my daughter. Sophie lingered near the fireplace, her posture straight, her little hands clasped in front of her. She looked every bit like she belonged in a storybook, 8 years old, heart wide open, cheeks rosy from excitement, still believing that kindness earned love and that grandparents cherished every grandchild equally. She was wrong. "All right," declared Richard, donning reading glasses and unfolding a sheet of paper like he was about to announce quarterly profits. "As always, we'll begin with the youngest and move upward. Children only for this first round." This meant Emma, Charlotte's daughter, would be first. She was 7.5, just a few months younger than Sophie. "Emma Winslow," Richard announced. 5 packages. A house staff member in a pressed black vest stepped forward and delicately gathered Emma's gifts, depositing them beside her like sacred treasures. The wrapping alone likely cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Emma squealed with delight as she tore through the layers, revealing a velvet riding coat with her initials embroidered in gold thread, a custom music box shaped like a grand piano, an iPad in a pink leather case, pearl earrings, and a certificate for equestrian lessons at a private academy. "Oh, thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Grandpa," she shouted, running to them with rehearsed enthusiasm. Vivian smiled indulgently and cupped Emma's face. "Only the best for our little star." Sophie clapped quietly from the side, her eyes wide, her smile hesitant. Next was Tyler, Claudia, and Andrew's son, who received 4 packages, a brand new drone, a child-sized Rolex watch, a set of luxury ski gear, and a premium gaming console. The room buzzed with admiration and praise. Every child, nieces, nephews, even the children of Richard's law partners, stepped forward one by one, each name read from the list, each gift received with squeals and hugs and appreciative gasps. The pile under the tree shrank steadily. Sophie's gift, the one she had wrapped herself with hand-cut snowflakes taped to the outside, remained untouched, sitting humbly among the designer paper and metallic bows. Still, she waited. Patient. Hopeful. I sat frozen on the edge of the silk-upholstered sofa beside Michael, my hand resting on my knee, fingers tense. Every time Richard paused, my stomach leapt, waiting to hear her name. But it never came. One by one, the final gifts were handed out. The pile vanished completely. Every child now sat grinning, surrounded by open boxes, ribbon clippings, and toys that sparkled with wealth and status. Except for my daughter. Sophie stood alone. No one had called her name. A heavy silence settled over the room like a snowfall gone still. Some adults looked confused. Others quickly avoided eye contact. Brooke, bless her, looked horrified. Even a few children turned to Sophie with furrowed brows, unsure if something had been forgotten or if they'd just misunderstood. Richard folded the list and said, "And that concludes our children's gifts. Next, we'll move on to the adults, starting with Dad." Michael's voice cut through the room like a sharp wind. Richard paused, eyebrows raised. "Yes, son. You seem to have missed Sophie." Everyone looked at her now. My little girl, standing so still that her fingers had started fidgeting with the ribbon on her dress. Vivian's smile tightened, panic barely concealed beneath layers of practiced charm. "Oh, goodness, there must have been a mix-up. Sophie, darling, I'm sure your gifts are here somewhere. We certainly wouldn't forget you." But she did not move to look. She did not bend toward the tree. She did not even meet my eyes. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. A carefully executed sleight. Sophie looked down at her polished patent leather shoes, her small voice floating through the quiet. It's okay, Grandma. Maybe Santa got confused. My heart cracked. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears as awkward murmurs rippled around the room. Grace busied herself fixing Emma's bows. Claudia reached for another champagne glass. Richard cleared his throat again, clearly preparing to move on. I started to rise, ready to take Sophie by the hand and leave this whole place and all its cold cruelty behind. But Michael stood first. And everything stopped. There is, he said, voice clear and unwavering, one more gift. The room stilled. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Michael reached into the inside pocket of his tailored navy blazer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, simple, elegant, unassuming. It looked absurdly out of place in a room bursting with excess. But the way he held it made it feel like the most important thing in the world. Vivian narrowed her eyes. Michael, we agreed all gifts would be coordinated to avoid inconsistencies. He ignored her. Instead, he walked across the room, calm, deliberate, and knelt before our daughter. This is for you, sweetheart, he said, handing her the envelope with both hands. Mom and I have been waiting for just the right time. Sophie looked to me, eyes wide with confusion. I nodded, barely able to speak. She took the envelope and carefully opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were a few documents, thick paper, gold seals, letterheads she didn't understand. What is it, Daddy? She whispered. Michael smiled. Not his polite Winslow family smile, but the real one, the one that reached his eyes. It's your future, baby girl. He stood then and turned to the room, voice strong and steady. Inside that envelope, he announced, are the documents for a trust fund we established for Sophie the day she was born. Kara and I have been contributing to it every single month. For 8 years. Murmurs stirred among the guests. Vivian's jaw twitched. Richard's posture stiffened. Michael continued. We never wanted Sophie's future to be conditional. Not based on approval. Not based on appearances. Not based on how well she fits in at some family gathering. This gift ensures she'll have the freedom to become who she is no matter what anyone in this room thinks of her. I felt my breath catch. But Michael wasn't done. There's something else in there, Sophie. Look again. Sophie reached back into the envelope and pulled out a folded letter. It bore the logo of a real estate company. That, Michael said, glancing around the stunned room, is the paperwork for our new home. I blinked. We had not been house hunting. Or at least, I had not. We close in January, he said, turning to me with an apologetic smile. It's a craftsman house. For bedrooms. Huge backyard. And most importantly, he turned to face his parents again. It's in Denver, Colorado. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Vivian gasped audibly. Richard's hands clenched at his sides. Denver? Vivian repeated, her voice brittle. But that's across the country. Exactly 1,976 miles, I checked, Michael replied coolly. I've accepted a promotion, regional director for the Western Division. We'll be starting fresh in the new year. My knees gave slightly, and I reached for the back of the sofa for balance. I was still trying to catch up to what was happening, what he had done. Richard finally spoke, his voice low and ominous. You've made this decision without consulting us? Michael nodded. I did. You have responsibilities here, Michael. To the family. To your future. I have one responsibility, he said, stepping beside me and placing a hand on my shoulder. To this family. To my family. My wife. My daughter. The room erupted in whispers. Shock. Disbelief. Maybe a few nods of support. I saw Brooke nod silently from across the room, her eyes glassy. But then, the smallest voice in the room cut through the noise. Sophie. Are we moving, Mommy? She asked, looking up at me. I nodded, my eyes brimming. Yes, sweetheart. We are. She smiled, pure, radiant, and full of something I hadn't seen in her all night. Relief. What about my painting? She asked. I brought it for Grandma and Grandpa. The room went quiet again. Vivian's face twitched. Michael crouched again beside our daughter. You did something beautiful, Sophie. And beautiful things should go in places where they're appreciated. He stood and looked directly at his parents. We won't be staying for the adult gift exchange, he said. I think we've given and received enough for one evening. And just like that, we turned to leave. Not with drama. Not with tears. But with quiet dignity and an envelope that had changed everything. As we turned toward the door, ready to leave that house of porcelain smiles and cold hearts, a voice behind us called out, "Wait." We all stopped. Michael turned, his arm protectively around Sophie, and I looked back to see Daniel, his older brother, rising from his seat. His wife Claudia stared at him, clearly mortified. "This is wrong," Daniel said. His voice trembled not with fear, but with long-restrained truth finally surfacing. All of it. I stiffened, bracing for yet another defense of the Winslow name. But then he surprised us. Michael's right. This family, it's become more about performance than love. Appearances. Achievements. Control. A hush fell over the room, and every pair of eyes was now on him. Daniel glanced down at his son and daughter, who were quietly watching from their place by the fireplace. "We are teaching our children that love is earned, that it's conditional. Based on violin recitals, private schools, and the price tags on Christmas gifts." Vivian's face flushed, the color of polished cranberry glass. "Daniel," she said firmly, "this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time," he shot back. "Because if Michael walks out right now and you let him, he's not coming back. And someday, neither will the rest of us." There was a flicker of something in Vivian's expression. Regret? Shame? Or just fear of losing her grip? But Richard stepped forward, the air shifting with his presence. "We've indulged Michael's rebellious nature for years," he said coldly. "If he chooses to abandon this family and move across the country without so much as a discussion, that is his decision. But it will come with consequences." The threat was thinly veiled. Michael didn't flinch. He simply turned to Sophie and knelt beside her. "Would you still like to give Grandma and Grandpa your painting before we go?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. My heart thudded in my chest as she walked back to the tree and picked up the little gift she had wrapped herself. She carried it with careful grace, walked straight to her grandparents, and held it out with both hands. "I made this for you," she said quietly. "I won first place at school." Vivian took it with a mechanical smile, her eyes finally meeting Sophie's for longer than a second. "Thank you, Sophie," she said, and for the first time, her voice did not sound rehearsed. It sounded unsure. And, just like that, it was done. Michael took my hand. I took Sophie's. And we walked out. Out of that glittering cage. Out of that legacy built on hierarchy and pride. Out of 10 years of quiet disrespect. The moment the front door closed behind us, the cold December air hit our faces, but for the first time all night, I felt warm. We buckled Sophie into the back seat. She clutched the envelope in her lap like it was a treasure map. Michael and I sat in silence as he started the engine. Finally, Sophie asked, "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" Michael and I exchanged a look. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "They're not mad at you. Sometimes grown-ups forget what really matters." "Like paintings?" she asked, looking down at the spot where her gift had rested just minutes earlier. "Exactly like paintings," Michael said softly. She smiled faintly and leaned her head against the window. "It's okay. We're getting a treehouse." Michael glanced at me and smiled. I reached across the console and took his hand. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "For everything?" "For everything." The drive home was quiet. Snow had begun to fall again, gently frosting the windshield. Sophie eventually drifted to sleep, the envelope still clutched tightly to her chest. Inside it was more than money. It was freedom. Freedom from manipulation. From performance. From needing to prove ourselves every year, every dinner, every carefully orchestrated holiday gathering. And for the first time in our marriage, we were truly free. We got home late, the kind of late where even the neighborhood Christmas lights seemed to have dimmed for the night. Michael carried Sophie upstairs without waking her, her tiny fingers still curled around the edge of the envelope like it was a security blanket. I followed close behind, feeling like I was finally stepping back into reality, a warm, safe one we had created on our own. Downstairs, The modest little tree we had put up in the corner of our living room twinkled with mismatched lights and handmade ornaments. It was not perfect, but it was ours. I sat on the couch and stared at it while Michael tucked Sophie into bed. Each ornament told a story. Our first trip to the mountains, Sophie's hand-painted wooden reindeer from preschool, the glass bell we bought the year we couldn't afford anything else. There was no gold-plated centerpiece, no imported garlands, but there was love in every branch. Michael came downstairs, his face tired but soft. He sat beside me and placed an arm around my shoulders. "I didn't mean for tonight to go that way," he said. I turned to him. "How long have you been planning this?" He paused before answering. "The trust fund?" "Since the day she was born." "The house in Denver, about 6 months. The job offer came through in the fall." "You did all that without telling me?" I asked, not angry, just stunned. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "A real gift. Something that showed you I've been listening all these years. Watching. And I knew. I knew we couldn't keep living under their shadow. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it out loud until tonight." I looked at him, really looked. For years, I had seen him as the bridge between me and a family that never wanted me. Now, he had become the bridge out. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. His shoulders dropped in relief. "We're going to be okay," he replied. "Better than okay." We sat there a while, in silence, the kind of silence that comes only after emotional hurricanes. Then, slowly, we made our way upstairs. Sleep came quickly, wrapped in exhaustion, but also something close to peace. The next morning, Sophie woke us at 6:30 a.m., bouncing on our bed in her red flannel pajamas, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Is it Christmas now?" she asked. Michael laughed. "Yes, now it's Christmas." She ran downstairs ahead of us, gasping as if she had never seen the living room before. Her stocking was filled with little treasures, color pencils, fuzzy socks, a mini journal, and her favorite chocolate-covered almonds. "Santa came," she shouted, holding up a glittery snow globe we had tucked in last minute. We followed behind, still in our robes, just in time to see her eyes go wide at the sight of the dollhouse beside the tree, a handcrafted wooden masterpiece we had found at a local artisan fair and saved up for. She let out a squeal of delight, rushing over to open its tiny painted doors and swing its miniature staircase. Michael sat on the floor with her, pointing out the details, while I made hot chocolate in the kitchen. It was simple. It was magical. And it was ours. Then, the doorbell rang. Michael and I exchanged a confused glance. Who would be visiting at 7:15 a.m. on Christmas morning? He went to open it, and I peeked from the kitchen doorway. Standing there, snow dusted on his coat, was Daniel, with his 3 kids, all bundled up and holding brightly colored gift bags. "Sorry to barge in," he said awkwardly. "But we didn't want Sophie to think the whole family forgot her." Sophie peeked from behind the dollhouse and her face lit up. Daniel's kids approached her shyly and handed over their gifts, art supplies, a friendship bracelet, a handmade card. Sophie hugged them all and ran to her room to get her own drawings in return. As the kids played together, Daniel pulled Michael and me aside. "I left last night," he said. "Told Mom and Dad what they did was disgusting." I packed up the kids, booked a hotel. Claudia stayed behind, but I needed to draw a line. Michael blinked in surprise. "You really left?" "I should have done it years ago," Daniel said. "But seeing you stand up like that, it woke something up. I couldn't sit there and pretend anymore." Before we could respond, another knock came. This time it was Brooke, holding a gift bag and a bottle of sparkling cider. "Hope it's not too early," she said. "Just wanted to say, what you did last night. That took guts. And I admire the hell out of it." Soon, the house filled with laughter, cinnamon rolls, and the sounds of kids running around, barefoot and giddy. Our home, for the first time, felt full. Not with obligation, but with real connection. With the kind of family you choose. By mid-morning, our modest home had become a refuge. Kids were sprawled across the living room floor, playing board games and comparing stocking stuffers. Daniel stood by the window, sipping coffee and watching the snowfall with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Brooke had taken over the kitchen, adding her famous cinnamon glaze to the rolls I had barely finished baking. Michael leaned against the counter beside me, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in months. I felt like I could finally breathe. "This is nice," I said, almost afraid saying it out loud would break the spell. Michael smiled and nodded. "It's the first Christmas I've actually enjoyed in a long time." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang again. I opened it slowly this time, half expecting another warm face from our accidental gathering, but instead, I saw Grace, standing stiff in her designer coat, holding her phone in one hand and looking as if she had never stood on an unshoveled porch before in her life. "Hi," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" I paused, glancing back at the laughter behind me. She looked almost small. Not in stature, but in spirit. "I guess," I replied, stepping aside. Grace walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the cozy chaos in our living room. She took in the mismatched decorations, the squeals of laughter, the scent of cinnamon and cocoa in the air. "This looks different," she said. "That's one word for it," I replied flatly. She turned to Michael, who stood behind me now. "Mom sent me. She wants you to come back for Christmas dinner. She says there's been a misunderstanding, that Sophie's gifts were misplaced." Michael's face hardened. "They weren't." Grace hesitated. "I know. I told her that. But she insists on saving face. Says she wants to smooth things over. She wants to fix the optics," I said. Grace looked uncomfortable. "Yes, but also, maybe something else. After you left, she fell apart. She actually cried, Michael. In front of guests. Said she didn't mean to hurt Sophie, that she just wanted to motivate you." Michael didn't respond right away. He just crossed his arms and stared at his sister. "You believe that?" he asked. Grace opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked toward Sophie, now laughing with Daniel's youngest as they raced toy cars across the floor. "I don't know," she admitted finally. I think Mom's afraid. That she pushed too far. That she's lost you." "She did," Michael said simply. "And if you're only here to convince me to protect her image, you're wasting your time." "I'm not," Grace said softly. "At least, I don't think I am. I wanted to see for myself." Her eyes moved back to the tree, to the handmade ornaments, to the half-eaten breakfast and coffee mugs warming cold hands. "I forgot this is what family is supposed to feel like," she said quietly. There was a long pause. "Do you want to stay for a while?" Michael asked, his tone no longer sharp. Grace blinked. "Really? You're still Sophie's aunt," I said. "And Sophie's not the one who needs to be punished." Grace stepped out of her heels and nodded slowly. "Okay, just for a bit." We made her a plate of breakfast and poured her coffee. She sat beside Daniel, who looked as stunned as I felt. And just like that, our circle grew a little larger. Later that afternoon, as the house began to settle from the day's excitement, Daniel pulled Michael aside near the coat rack. "I'm thinking about moving," he said quietly. "Maybe not to Denver, but away from all this." Michael raised his eyebrows. "You're serious?" "I've spent years tiptoeing around Mom and Dad's expectations," Daniel said. "Claudia loves the life, the country clubs, the connections, but I'm starting to think it's not worth it. My kids are growing up thinking love has a price tag." "What does Claudia think?" Michael asked. Daniel shrugged. "We're not in the same place right now. But I'm done making decisions out of fear. Watching you walk away last night, it gave me permission to rethink everything." Michael clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." As Daniel packed up to leave, he hugged Sophie and promised they would visit soon. His kids gave her another handmade card before running out into the snow. Grace left soon after, with a lingering look back at our home before slipping into her car. Michael and I stood in the doorway, waving until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Then, finally, we exhaled. "I think today was more important than any Christmas we've ever had," I said. He nodded. "And we didn't even plan it." I smiled. "Maybe that's the lesson." We closed the door behind us and turned toward the living room, where our daughter sat surrounded by crayons, stickers, and her dollhouse, unbothered, unscarred, and completely content. She had been left out, ignored, and dismissed by people who should have loved her unconditionally. But now, she was wrapped in more love than they could ever afford to buy. A week after Christmas, the house was quiet again. The tree was still up, its lights casting a soft glow across the living room in the early morning calm. Sophie sat at the coffee table with a fresh set of watercolor paints spread in front of her, a look of fierce concentration on her face. Michael had just returned from the mailbox, a light dusting of snow still on his jacket. He handed me a thick envelope. "From the real estate agent," he said with a smile. "Contract copies, keys to the lockbox, neighborhood info." I ran my fingers over the envelope. It was real now. In less than 3 weeks, we would be in Denver. A new house. A new beginning. I opened it and pulled out the documents. Inside was a photo of the house, a warm, inviting craftsman-style home with a wide porch and a massive oak tree standing proudly in the backyard. "It's perfect," I whispered. Sophie looked up. "Is that our tree?" Michael leaned over and showed her the photo. "That's the one, kiddo. The treehouse we're going to build will go right there." She grinned and returned to her painting, adding little birds into the branches of the imaginary tree on her canvas. I watched her for a while, amazed at how she had carried herself through everything. She never once asked why her name wasn't called during the gift exchange. She never cried, never clung to me in the middle of the night with questions about why Grandma and Grandpa forgot her. Instead, she painted. And it hit me, Sophie's way of processing the world was through creation, not confrontation. She was making sense of her story with color, not conflict. Michael brought over 2 mugs of coffee, sitting beside me as we watched her. "She's stronger than we realize," he said. "She's stronger than all of them," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that painting she gave my parents." I turned to him. "What about it?" "I want her to make a new one," he said. "A new painting for our new house. Something special. Something ours. And I want it to be the first thing we hang on the wall." I smiled. "Then let's ask her." Michael walked over to Sophie, crouched beside her, and said softly, "Hey, sweetheart. Can I ask you something?" She nodded, her brush paused midair. "Would you make a new painting for our new house in Denver? One that we can hang up the very first day?" She blinked, surprised, then nodded with such seriousness it made me laugh. "Yes," she said firmly. "But it has to be really good. It has to show what happy looks like." Michael glanced at me. "That sounds perfect." Sophie got up, rummaged through her art supplies, and pulled out a fresh canvas. She cleared the table with purpose, placed her paint jars neatly beside her, and began sketching. Hours passed. We didn't interrupt. Every now and then, she would hum to herself or ask us how to spell something. But mostly, she worked in silence, focused and inspired. That evening, she brought it to us. It was beautiful. In her painting, there was a house with a wide porch wrapped in golden light. In front of it stood 3 figures, us, holding hands. Behind us, the giant oak tree stretched its branches like arms, and from one thick limb hung a simple wooden swing. And at the top of the painting, in her neat little handwriting, were the words, "Our real home." I could not speak. I blinked fast, but the tears came anyway. Michael stood up and walked to her, wrapping his arms around her. "I love it, Sophie," he whispered. "It's exactly what happy looks like." She looked up at him. "Do you think Grandma will ever come visit?" Michael exchanged a glance with me before kneeling to her level. "Maybe one day," he said gently. "But only if she learns how to be kind. Like you." Sophie nodded, accepting the answer without disappointment. We framed the painting the next day. And, just like that, Sophie gave us our first piece of Denver. 1 year later, Denver snow fell lightly outside our window. The view from our kitchen table now stretched into mountain ridges dusted in white, a postcard-worthy backdrop that never quite lost its magic. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and baking bread filled our home. Our home. Sophie was in the backyard, bundled in her winter coat, her feet crunching through the frost as she placed glittery ornaments on the little tree next to the one with her treehouse. Yes, the one Michael had built with his own hands by spring. Inside that treehouse, she now kept her journals, her paints, and her sketchbooks. It had become her safe place, her sanctuary of imagination. Michael, wearing a cozy flannel, was stirring soup on the stove, humming a tune I recognized from last Christmas. Only this year, it sounded happier. I talked to Daniel this morning, he said. They're doing great in Chicago. The kids love the school, and he finally convinced Claudia to scale back the country club events. Good for them, I said. It's amazing what happens when you take one step toward peace. He turned toward me. I think we were that first step. I smiled and nodded. We had found more than a new address. We had found clarity, comfort, control over the legacy we were shaping for Sophie. I glanced at the wall above our fireplace. There, framed and centered, hung Sophie's painting, the one she had made the week after everything changed. Beneath it, small hooks held our keys and winter scarves, like it was both artwork and compass. Everything in that painting had come true. The house, the light, the three of us standing hand in hand. And the swing on the oak tree? Michael had added that too. We had received holiday cards from Grace and Emma a few weeks earlier. The note had been short but sincere. We hope you're happy. Emma loved her art set. She's drawing now too. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the wall. As for Vivian and Richard, well, they had kept their distance. Vivian sent a birthday card to Sophie, signed with just her name, and once attempted to call on a Sunday afternoon. But when Michael answered and asked if she was calling to apologize or just to defend herself, she hung up. Richard never reached out. We had heard, through Grace, that the will had been changed. That Michael's name had been quietly removed from several trusts and business holdings. There was no confrontation, no official statement, just legal silence. And it did not matter, because we had never relied on that fortune. What we had built here on our own terms was worth more than anything they had tried to dangle over us. Michael and I sat down on the couch as Sophie came in from the cold, her cheeks pink and her hands holding a pine cone dipped in glitter. Look, she said. I made one for every branch. I opened my arms and she crawled onto my lap, curling into me like she had when she was younger. It's beautiful, I said. Just like you. Are we doing Christmas like last year? She asked. With the board games and cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate? Exactly like that, Michael replied. Do you miss the big house? She asked, curiously. The fancy one? Michael looked at me, then back at her. Not even a little. Sophie leaned back and smiled. I like this Christmas better. We spent the rest of the day decorating, baking, and playing games. No formality. No pressure. Just us and a few friends we had made in Denver who stopped by to join in. They brought cookies, stories, and genuine warmth. When night fell, we stood together in the living room. Sophie held our hands, and we admired the lights on the tree. The small room glowed with amber softness. No chandeliers. No crystal. Just a $10 string of lights and decades of love in the making. You know what I think? Sophie whispered. What's that, sweetheart? I asked. I think the best gift wasn't the house or the tree house or even the painting. No, Michael said, kneeling to her level. She shook her head, her eyes so certain it stopped us both in our tracks. The best gift, she said, was that you picked me, even when they didn't. I bent down, wrapping my arms around her. We will always pick you, I whispered, my voice breaking. Every time. Michael joined us, holding us both close, our small family wrapped in a promise stronger than anything ever placed under a tree. That night, as snow quietly blanketed the world outside, we tucked Sophie into bed and turned off the lights. I looked around the home we had built, the life we had chosen. We had walked away from wealth, from legacy, from generations of cold tradition. And we had gained everything that mattered. Because love should never be earned through perfection. And family should never have to be bought. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance you can give your child is freedom. Freedom to be themselves. Freedom to be safe. Freedom to be loved. Unconditionally. Always.